Well, many of the fans haven't been able to get down to watch England on this fantastic Ashes tour, which many people obviously look forward to. But some of the press pack are down there, and I managed to track down Mr. Ali Martin from The Guardian. Ali, welcome along to 98 Out.
Cheers, Darren. Good to see you again, mate.
Yeah. How's things going in Australia?
Well, I mean, off the field.
Yeah, we'll get to on the field in a sec.
On the field is pretty self-evident. No, off the field, it's been a strange tour so far, to be honest. We've pretty much the entire UK press pack, albeit there's only about 8 or 9 of us, had to fly in initially to Sydney, where there wasn't quarantine, or rather, there was sort of 72 hours of quarantine in wherever you were staying, and then you could come out and roam and what have you. And then it was a case of actually covering the first test off the TV, which is pretty unsatisfactory in a lot of ways. But we weren't alone. There was a lot of the Australian press pack were the same. A lot of the commentary teams were doing it from either Melbourne or Sydney as well. Essentially, that the hard border at Queensland, which needed 14 days hard quarantine to get into, meant that it was quite off-putting for a lot of people, and also created a lot of logistical issues as well. So it's been a case of doing the first test off the TV in Sydney, but also being able to sort of partly work on the same time zone, but sort of taking a bit of the local kind of mood as well. But then 3 of us in an advance party of today managed to get ourselves to South Australia, to Adelaide, where we're now ready to start, going up to training and bothering players at nets, and then fingers crossed, come Thursday we'll get to watch what should be a pretty iconic day-night test match at the Adelaide Oval. So all systems are going now. It feels like the tour's sort of starting in earnest, certainly for the press pack, and maybe for England, after they seem to use the first test as a bit of a warm-up.
Yeah, say hello to Danny Rubin from me. I'm trying to badger him for some kind of access, but he'll give us something eventually, I'm sure. So let's talk about the obvious. Let's start off with, given England's lack of preparation, do you think what happened was inevitable?
I don't know. It's funny, actually. I mean, you'd say that, but then Australia came into it a little bit underprepared themselves. You'd probably argue that more of their first team test players were key players in the World T20 campaign that they obviously went on to win as well. So you'd have thought they'd be a bit drained. I mean, obviously there's nothing like home comforts for those players, so they'd be coming back to very familiar surroundings. And the Gabba, I know they'd lost there in January to India, but essentially a sort of, before that, it was a 32-year stronghold for Australian cricket. So hugely familiar surroundings for them. And for England, well, they had their chances. They won the toss, and ultimately blew it on that first morning when they, collapsed to, what was it, 11 for 3, 29 for 4, and eventually managed to sort of muster just about 147. But they got a bit unlucky. I must say, they got a bit unlucky on the first evening. If they'd managed to stay on the field rather than the rains that came, you'd have fancied probably England's seam attack might have done some damage then in that evening session. As it was, Australia's innings started in bright blue skies, and as well as England bowled, and actually the frontline seamers did do well. I think they deserve credit for the way that they performed. You're going to do so well to win a test match from that position. So, from the day one position. So really, I don't think it was inevitable, because I think England are probably, you'd like to think they were slightly better than what they showed over the course of those 4 days. And Australia, they're not without their own weaknesses or a slight soft underbelly in their batting lineup as well. So England, they probably possibly picked the wrong team. I would have gone for 5 seamers personally and probably bowled first. But as it was, some individuals in the side obviously had some personal nightmares out there, and as a collective, it just wasn't enough in the face of what was, let's be honest, a pretty impressive performance by Australia as well.
The Ashes, what makes it so special is that there are so many subplots, and the whole backdrop to everything and how it unfolds. Let's not be under any illusions. We are just one match into a series of 5, and expect anything and everything to happen going forward. But just looking at, I'm just looking at selection. Lots been made of the fact that Broad was left out. The Australians clearly targeted Jack Leach. They always seem to do this. They'll pick someone. It's usually the captain that they want to go after, but they seem to go after Jack Leach. Poor chap hasn't played Test cricket for quite a long time, comes back into a baptism of fire. for this Ashes series. And then it just raised the questions that are we missing Moeen on this tour?
Well, we're always missing Moeen Ali because he makes everything so great when he's out on the field doing his best work. But let's be honest, I mean, 4 years ago was a real struggle for Moeen in Australia, and it probably was time for England to move on. It certainly felt like it was time for Moeen to move on. He felt like he'd sort of run his race in Test cricket. But you're right. I mean, I think probably what we've got to look back on really is all the talk of 2 years of preparation for this Ashes tour is that we've had pretty much 2 wasted summers in terms of England's spin department. In 2020, we saw Don Best promoted to the role and sort of entrusted with it, and after Leach had let's be honest, a pretty decent Ashes series the summer before. I mean, obviously, famously with the one not out at Headingley, but he was taking his wickets at 24 in that series. And if he hadn't overstepped when he removed Steve Smith at Old Trafford, who went on to make that big double hundred, it could have been a very, very different series there. So Jack Leach was unfortunate to be overlooked. They heavily invested in Don Best 2 years ago. That was a misplaced confidence for a player that palpably wasn't ready for international cricket yet. And as such, the pair of them combined in the subcontinent early this year, Jack Leach was the leading wicket taker. But then come the summer with no Ben Stokes, England just didn't feel able to pick Jack Leach as one of 4 bowlers. They wanted to have 4 seamers in the attack. And so Jack missed out all summer. So it was a massive ask for him to come in and perform straight away, especially with a lack of overs in the warm-ups as well. And you're right, Australia, I mean, that was a pretty merciless kind of targeting of him. We've seen it before. We probably saw it before in Graham Swan's last Ashes tour as well, where it's kind of stating the obvious, really. But if you are able to take down the spin bowler in an attack, it just increases the workload for the seamers. It gives the captain fewer places to turn. It makes it very hard to control the run rate. And that cumulative effect over time that meant that, even when England did manage to get Australia, 5-6 down after tea on the second day, the seamers had run out of gas. Leach had nowhere to go. And a guy like Travis Head, who, for all the best will in the world, I think he's clearly a talented player, and he's got a back catalogue of success in domestic cricket, albeit he struggled at Sussex during the summer. But, it was quite remarkable to see a player of his level survive the first 10 balls, but then really crack on. And an 85 ball 100, that's the kind of stuff that we talk about. We sort of dream about a player like Joss Buttler doing for England with a platform set, and yet it doesn't seem to happen. And here was Travis Head really repaying the faith that Australia's selectors showed in him. So it was a very calculated assault on Jack Leach by Australia's batsmen, and it might have even already had the effect of hitting him out the series. I don't know. We're still waiting to sort of get to nets tomorrow and try and find a bit more about selection. But yeah, it's hard to see how Jack comes back from this. But then again, it's almost hard to see how England can have a all-seam attack and still be able to keep up with the over rate, which come the end of the first test cost them, about 13 grand a man in match fees and 5 points in the World Test Championship. So yeah, you've got to say, I mean, it's one of the many sort of contributing factors to what was a pretty disastrous start.
Does Joe Root need to back himself more with the ball?
Oh, hi, Paul. Sorry, I didn't see you there. You've taken me by surprise there.
Sneak in.
Yeah, I mean, in the event of them picking an all-seam attack, yeah, it's right. I mean, Joe Root is going to have to put a bit more into his own bowling, and that asks a lot of him, because it's probably it's a discipline he's better at than he thinks. I believe. I think he's a much better spinner than he probably gives himself credit for. But the amount of mental energy that is taken up by the captaincy, and also trying to sustain this absolutely celestial run of form that he's enjoying in 2021, I think ideally, yes, he'd rather have a frontline spinner to turn to rather than have to be digging England out of the hole with the ball, given that that's what he does so regularly with the bat. So it might be the way they go, but it is a huge ask for him.
Turning to the batting, the one thing with this test was on, Thursday night, Friday, we had the hope of that Root and Milan stand, which all of a sudden thought, oh, maybe, can we, possibly. But another collapse put paid to those faint glimmers of hope. you got any thoughts on the batting in terms of maybe not selection, but just the batting order? Is it the right order for those players?
I think it probably is. I mean, I think England haven't really. I mean, they haven't really got a settled opening partnership in that Haseeb Hameed and Rory Burns are very new together, and you were probably looking for Rory Burns to really kind of step up there as the experienced man. You know, he's got 30 tests behind him, and that first ball by Mitchell Starc just absolutely. I mean, I don't know. I mean, it was a mind-blowing moment, and fair play to Starc. You know, it's absolutely superb. The surge of energy that gave Australia at the start of the Test match, but what it did to Rory Burns, you know, clearly affected his confidence. I think it was only the fourth time in 260 odd first-class innings that he then hasn't faced up to the first ball in the second innings, which is quite a brave call when you think you're surrounded by all those Australian close fielders who I've got no doubt will be giving him an earful about that, and probably will do throughout the rest of the series. David Malan he's not really a natural number 3, is he? He's a number 5 by trade, you'd have to say, and that's where he had his success in Australia 4 years ago. Fair play to him. He's stepping up and filling the hole. It's an opportunity that's come late in his career, one he probably never thought was going to come. So he was never going to turn down number 3. Is it his natural position? Possibly not. But the job of those top 3 essentially is for at least 2 of them to come off to keep Joe Root away from that new ball. And it's something they failed. They managed to do that in the second innings, but they summarily failed to do it in the first. And obviously Hazelwood got Root out for a duck, which again was part of that sort of cataclysmic first day. Thereafter, you're looking at guys like Ben Stokes, who is, he's coming off a 4-month layoff. We saw how rusty he looked with the ball, but you've got to factor in the batting side of it as well in terms of, it's only in the last sort of 6 weeks since he had that second finger operation that he's been able to grip a bat at all around the handle. That's where he really struggled, and I think that was feeding into a lot of his the mental side of it as well. A guy like Ollie Pope, who, we look at him and we say, well, this is the Ian Bell clone. He gets these huge raps for his sort of technical excellence against seam, but I must say, I'm slightly worried about how sort of skittish he looks against off spin. Nathan Lyons, he's clearly an excellent test bowler. He's just brought up 400 test wickets, so it's not to play down his ability. But Ollie Pope, we saw it in India, we saw it a bit in the summer against India as well in the return series at home, and then that second innings against Nathan Lyon, just cutting so injudiciously early in his innings with a ball that's spinning into him on a pitch that's the bounce is starting to go up and down. That was a poor shot. And again, Just Butler just continues to kind of frustrate. You saw in the first innings, I mean, he was the one that kind of led that fight back, and I probably think that's probably the way for him to go out here, particularly when the fields are up. If he's probably, his best bet is to be positive and attacking and try and use the fields being tight up to try and go over the top, because that is his natural game, probably more than trying to grind out runs from number 7. But unfortunately, again, the same issue from 4 years ago is that the England's tail is going to be bombarded by this Australian pace attack, and they're going to need to find answers. And the issue they've got really is that Chris Woakes is probably the only natural number 8 in the whole squad. He's not particularly comfortable against a short ball. And Ollie Robinson, we saw, first innings, he pretty much backed away, didn't he, and played that wild drive behind. So he's someone that, is, again, might be a result of a lack of warm-up cricket, etc. And there's only so much you can do in the nets. But, you're looking for guys. It shouldn't come down to the tail to have to sort of bail out the top order. But ultimately, their time is going to come. And England, they're just not going to win this series or have any chance in this series if it's a case of 7 out, all out. So yeah, there's, in terms of personnel, I don't really see any changes for this Test match in terms of the batting, but in terms of the approach, I guess you just kind of fingers across that they've just got a little bit more used to conditions. It won't be nearly as bouncy in Adelaide, we don't think, as we saw at the Gabba, and that did seem to be their undoing for a few of the dismissals in terms of just that probably 10-20 centimetres extra bounce that you don't get in England seemed to catch them by surprise. So that hopefully won't be the case in Adelaide, albeit they've got the pink ball coming up, and Australia, I think they played 8 pink ball tests at home, and they've won all 8, and it's 5 from 5 in Adelaide. So it is a seriously tough examination coming up for them. But who knows, if the game is, if they leave a bit of grass on, if it's a bit of a low scoring dogfight, who knows? England could emerge on top that way, I suppose. But seeing them putting on big runs, they talk about big runs. but we haven't really seen it all year. I think they've only gone past 400 once in the last 19 innings or something like that. And we saw at the Oval and at Lord's during the summer against India is even when presented with a chance to kind of second innings dig themselves out of the hole, they were just unable to resist. So it's a massive concern, and it's one that they've got pretty much 2 days of training to rectify.
What are your thoughts on Broady and Jimmy in all of this? Do you see them coming back, one or both coming back for Adelaide?
I mean, I certainly see Jimmy Anderson coming back. And to be honest, it was interesting, especially being in Australia and hearing a lot of the narrative around those two, is that, they are guys that it was a massive shock to the sort of the commentary out here in Australia that those two weren't at the Gabba. And I'd have to say that in the case of Jimmy, I could understand it. He had a bit of a calf niggle at the start of the tour, so he had about 2 weeks delay before he could start bowling in the nets. That set him back. They said he was in prime match condition for the first test. He was fit to play, but ultimately, I think having seen the way that his calf blew up in that first Ashes test in 2019 at Edgbaston, which basically left them playing with 10 men for the entire test match, they went for the cautious route with him. And given that he averages 75 of the ball at the Gabba, I know it was a green top, but I don't think that was necessarily the worst call. I wouldn't criticise them for that. It does surprise me that they left out both of them, I must admit. And as I said earlier, I would have probably gone for the five strong pace attack and bowled first. That would have been the tactics I'd have gone for. But how Stuart Broad gets back into this side is probably the big question mark for England, because if you're going to assume that Leach probably makes way for Anderson, which of the three seamers do you leave out to get Stuart Broad in that played in the first test? Ollie Robinson was the standout. He was a standout performer. And again, I'd say what was interesting about the commentary in Australia was that I would, in years gone by, I'd expected there to have been a lot of sort of talking out the side of their mouths about the fact that the bloke's, not very quick, and there'd probably be unflattering comparisons with Gus Fraser or Derek Pringle and what have you. But actually, there was a huge amount of respect. Ricky Ponting was absolutely glowing about Ollie Robinson on commentary, really admiring his craft, the lines that he was banging out, and the movement he was still getting with the ball, even when it got older. So you feel like he's got to play. Mark Wood, the way, he only took 2 wickets, but he did knock over Steve Smith for 12, which is the kind of key wicket. We kind of expect Steve Smith to be scoring big runs in this series. And if there's an early kind of hold over him, and I know it's only 1 dismissal, but Mark Wood, and particularly what he did, I think he got a few of them hopping. He got Warner hopping. He got Travis Head hopping. You think Mark Wood's got to play. There's a bit more of a gap between this and the Boxing Day test as well. So you'd feel like Mark Wood has to play just as a point of difference. But then if Chris Woakes is the one to make way, and Chris Woakes, he didn't have a bad game with the ball. He wasn't hugely penetrative. But if you get rid of Chris Woakes, your tail starts at number 8, as I say, and then there is a lot more pressure on a batting lineup that hasn't been able to put big runs on the scoreboard at all. I know that's a negative way of thinking about it. There's an argument to say pick your best bowlers, pick your best batsmen, and go from there. But you do have to balance the side out. And no Chris Woakes at 8. As I say, if that moves Ollie Robinson to number 9, England will be under huge pressure at the top of the order, because there won't be anyone to bail them out.
There's talk reaching us this morning of possibly some injury news from the Australian camp. There's noise about David Warner, and also Josh Hazelwood as well is a potential doubt for the Test match. Are you hearing anything from your end?
Yeah, well, Cricket Australia have now confirmed that Hazelwood will definitely miss the Test match, and that probably has to be seen as a bonus for England. I think he takes his wickets at 18 in pink ball Tests in Adelaide. And he's obviously, he's just a world-class performer. We've seen it in the last 2 Ashes series at least, haven't we? So that is a big bonus. In terms of Warner, it's going to be an interesting one to see how he goes. I think we're going to have to watch him in nets this week and see how comfortable he is, because Australia haven't confirmed what the injury is. There's only talk of him having sore ribs, but to spend pretty much 2 days off the field and not open in that very small run chase on the final day, or what became the final day, you've got to assume that that's probably quite a serious injury there, possibly even a cracked rib. Now, I don't know, they could probably jab him up to the max with pain-killing injections and hide him in the field, probably put him in the slip so he doesn't have to throw and what have you. But that is going to be causing him discomfort. And I know it won't be as bouncy at the Gabba as Adelaide as it was at the Gabba. But again, if the guy's movement is impeded and England do have Mark Wood in their attack, that could cause them problems as well. So, albeit it was Ben Stokes who actually we think inflicted that injury when he hit him with a short ball in Brisbane. So that's their big headache, I think. And while Jai Richardson, who looks a very talented outswing bowler, a lot of pace, he's only 25, he's clearly the next cab off the rank with the bowling. I think they'd have to go for experience if Warner missed out, and that would be Usman Khawaja coming back in probably to open, I think. So, albeit, I mean, I'm looking at his record in the last few weeks, he's the top scorer in the Sheffield Shield, averaging 69 or around that. So he'd come in 4 minutes and feeling good about himself. So yeah, 2 changes possibly for Australia. One definitely confirmed, one we're waiting on. But Hazelwood's, that's not the worst news England could have got. I mean, also, you never want to see guys get injured. And I'm not saying it's Glenn McGrath stepping on a ball at Edgbaston in 2005, but that should make life a bit easier for England, especially with Richardson quite young. He's only played a couple of tests. If they can get on top of him, then it could present an avenue into the game.
Given the I'm not going to get into the wider debate, but just cricket is in a bit of navel gazing as a sport at the moment, with many things that are going on. So to me, it was really timely that we go into an Ashes series, which is, to every cricket fan, it's the biggest moment. It's the thing that really stirs the spirit and everything and all the rest of it. But I think also after, for me, a rather sterile T20 World Cup where empty stadiums or where they were, to see real cricket fans back and all the personality and the occasion that goes with an Ashes series. I posted a couple of videos on our social media of the Richies that turn up, the Australian equivalent of the Barmy Army, and just the joy and the celebration. It just, for me, just is a real shot in the arm after those awful stadium cheerleaders that we had in the UAE for the World Cup. Just unbelievable. It just feels like we're back playing and watching cricket again now.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. I mean, as I said at the top of the show, we were stuck in Sydney watching it remotely. So, but you could. It's interesting about you say about the World T20. I mean, I agree. I thought it was a pretty forgettable tournament. But Australia did win it, and so you kind of expected there to be a big noise about that here. But it just didn't seem to resonate. Didn't seem to generate the kind of thing that we've seen in the last week, which is when the guys are back out there in whites with the baggy green cap on, and it's and it's the Poms getting a stuffing. That is really when it enters the zeitgeist in this country, and it's being talked about on news programs, on radio, on as I say, radio phone-ins, etc. The papers go nuts for it, for Test cricket and Ashes cricket in particular. And yeah, as someone who probably counts themselves as a traditionalist, it's great to see.
There's an interesting side story going on that the Big Bash is taking place cheek by jowl with the Ashes. How is that being received locally?
It's interesting. It doesn't really attract. I mean, I tell you where it differs from cricket in England is that I've certainly found with the 100 all summer is that everything in English cricket pointed to the 100, whereas actually the job of that competition is to point outwards, right? So it is to bring people into the, it's meant to be the shop window. It's meant to bring people in and point them to the back where the good stuff is, right? And but over here, when you watch the Big Bash coverage, yeah, the grounds aren't particularly full, but it's a very young crowd, and also there is a big crossover with Test cricket. The commentators are constantly referencing what's happened during the Test match that day. There's a lot more promotion back and forth between the formats. So, look, while it is being played in slightly empty grounds, and I think they probably do suffer from some of the big name Aussies being on Test duty, and that's something they've just clearly made their peace with. It is part of the furniture here, and you can see the job that it's doing. Possibly a bit more than some of the formats in England in terms of that cross pollination, in terms of, when you've got that captive audience watching the short stuff, still talking to them about what's happening in the Test match. And I know it's a small thing, maybe it would only convert a handful of people, but you just sort of think the 100 should be doing more, should have been doing more last summer to really promote the whole game, but it was clearly just trying to find its feet in its first year. So hopefully that changes over time, given that it's not going away. But I just personally would like to see a bit more of that, to be honest, in the style of the Big Bash. The Big Bash isn't, again, it doesn't capture the national imagination here. But it is also a pretty reliable source of entertainment of an evening. It's on free to air, Channel 7. It's hugely colourful, and some of the commentary grates a little bit for English ears, but but ultimately, people are having a good time. So it's just not the same level as Test cricket over here. Test cricket is the true start of summer.
Probably a lesson to be learned over here. I mean, the biggest criticism and the most glaringly obvious problem that we had last year was this delineation of the summer into T20 Blast, Test matches, Red Ball, 100, and the poor old Royal London Cup as the distant relative. Maybe this is an example that, given that there are clearly different audiences in England for different forms of cricket, that you don't need to segregate them. You can run all of these competitions and coverage, in tandem with each other. You don't need to separate them.
Yeah, possibly. I guess the problem is that fourth format and 8/16 new teams if you go for the men's and women's teams as well. I mean, the women's side of it was the big plus of the 100, wasn't it, during the summer? And that was, I mean, I was pretty taken by that. But I probably would have argued that you could have achieved that in a different way. But the problem with adding something on top and not taking anything away, as you say, it leads to such a congested fixture list. And it doesn't. Each competition doesn't really manage to get that sort of narrative that builds up over the summer in the same way that international cricket does, and that's something they've got to answer. I don't know what the solution is unless you don't have the 100, or unless you start trimming down the blast, or even making short form cricket the domain of the 100, or you dispense with the 50 over cup. I mean, it's just, there is too much cricket, and yet the answer always seems to be add more cricket. So that's where we're at. I mean, and even looking at the international schedule at the moment, next winter is unbelievable. I mean, England have got tours to Bangladesh, Pakistan. There's a World T20. There's a back for a Test series in Pakistan. They've got a 2 Test series in New Zealand, which was the thank you for them coming over during the summer. And then there's also the one-day tour of South Africa as well. So it's utterly congested. That will then roll into the IPL. Even this winter, we've got a full Caribbean tour, which is going to be followed by the IPL, and then straight into a Test series at home against New Zealand as well. And I'm afraid that will ultimately just see people resting. It won't. I don't think the IPL will make way, because it pays too much in too short amount of time for the players to turn it down, which means the international product is being diluted as a result of players being rested and rotated. That in turn puts off the broadcasters. We've already seen, Sky is shouldering arms to overseas tours now. That used to be the West Indies tour, used to be the iconic Sky tour, didn't it? And
it was the very first one, wasn't it?
Yeah. I mean, that's pretty much watching that after school is how I got into cricket. So to see that go to BT, where again it will be a reduced audience, it's quite sad to watch, to be honest. It sort of feels like international cricket is eating itself. And the boards are kind of letting it happen because they want to sort of funnel people towards their short form tournaments. I don't know. Things do seem in a bit of a death spiral at the moment, which I think it sounds a bit like a bit of a downbeat note while I'm out here watching an iconic Ashes series. But just looking into the future, it's got to be a concern.
But that's the trouble, isn't it? It's money driving everything, whether it's individuals playing IPL for money, or whether it's TV rights, meaning that it's not free to air or it's not publicly available easily. It's money that's driving the sport. And I guess if we look at the context of the Ashes series, the way that and you may have covered this at the start, but the lack of preparation, I think, in this format of cricket, maybe not Test match, but a longer format of cricket, is probably ultimately, if you trace it all the way back, driven by money being pumped into the shorter form of cricket.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's true, and and that kind of goes back to the players that are being produced by the domestic system. In that, you've got to look at the team that won the World Cup in 2019. Now, we probably saw this summer just gone when the whole squad was knocked out by COVID and Ben Stokes captained what was a scratch team. Is that we've got an incredible generation of white ball cricketers in England at the moment. I mean, they are being produced left, right, and centre, and there is so much depth that guys. And we've just seen the PSL draft in the last couple of days. 15 English players picked up. They're huge amounts of white ball talent. But ultimately, the Test team, not a single batsman to make his debut since Joe Root in 2012 has averaged over 40, and that is kind of indicative of a system that is failing to whether it's the pitches, and this isn't me having a go at the counties, because they are ultimately trying to squeeze everything in while themselves trying to pick up the beer money from the blast games and what have you, and still sort of have their little niche in their own local markets. But I'm afraid that the quality of cricket that's producing in red ball cricket, it's not churning out the players, and that is ultimately you produce the players to play for England, which brings in the TV money, which then goes back into the county system. It's meant to be a symbiotic relationship, but something's not right at the moment, because we're just seeing a generation of white ball cricketers being produced. And let's be honest, white ball cricket, I mean, World Cups are different, but ultimately franchise cricket is such less pressure than playing in franchise leagues, and I think that's a big factor as well. I think it's probably the easier format. There's less scrutiny, there's less pressure. When you're playing short form cricket, you're looking to really come off. The best players will try and come off one in 5 matches maybe, and they probably make their peace with failure more. And we only have to look at the Test cricket that we've just seen and the absolute agony of Rory Burns after that first delivery to see that there is nothing that compares to Test cricket. But whether that is going to be sustainable over a period of time, whether that's the format that players are still going to want to drive their games towards, I don't know, because there's a quick and probably easier buck to be made as a white ball cricketer, and a lot of guys are doing it.
All right, before we let you go, I've got to ask you what your predictions for Adelaide and what your predictions for the Ashes. What's it going to end up
at? Well, I haven't. I find it very interesting that England have put so much stock in this pink ball when they've never won a pink ball test away from home, and Australia have won all 8 on Australian soil. But I do fear about a bit of a steamrolling if they don't somehow manage to pull off a win. So I'm going to say England just for this one. If they can, again, it's going to come down to conditions as well. We talk about twilight and bowling under lights. I mean, India played a pink ball test earlier this year in Adelaide and got bowled out for 36 in broad daylight. So,
right, yeah.
It's a very capricious format. We've also seen David Warner score an unbeaten 300 in a pink ball test. So it's a really capricious format, and it will be a bit of a lottery in terms of who gets what conditions at what time, and then also what they can, whether they can make the most of it. I would like to think that England, one test to the good, possibly without Josh Hazlewood in the Australian side, and maybe even David Warner missing, that they can just pounce here and level the series. But I must admit, over the course of 5 test matches, I'm struggling to see it. Hobart's an interesting one. That for a 5th test, they never played National Test there before. It's going to be chilly and cold. It's another pink ball test again. We don't know what pink ball tests do in Hobart because it'll be the first one they've hosted. So
stadium, there are less fans.
Exactly, and there is a bit of jeopardy in both of these games. It's just how they fare on those drop-in wickets in Melbourne and Sydney, where it does go pretty flat. And I must admit, I would assume that Australia would have the edge over them there. So I'm probably going to put my money one test into the series on a 3-1 Australian victory. But I think England getting a test win out here would be a big achievement in and of itself, and I think that would be something that we would be able to celebrate, given that they've lost what is it, 10 of the last 11 test matches in Australia. So to get a win would be a big feat. I think we're probably in fancy land in terms of talking about the series win, but just to see them get a win and possibly a few guys step up, maybe hopefully Joe Root can add a 7th or possibly even 8th hundred to his remarkable 2021. I think they're the things we're looking for. It's just great to be here, to be honest. I feel very, very lucky to be here, and I know I'm in a privileged position as well, because as great as the Brisbane Barmies were, there are clearly thousands of people who would love to have made the trip over who weren't able to do so. So, you know, fingers crossed that they can reward some of the people that are staying up all night drinking coffee and trying to get through what is sometimes quite a testing challenge.
Well, go well. Many thanks for giving us your time, Ali, and we look forward to reading your coverage in The Guardian for all of those listeners who want some intelligent and thoughtful coverage of this test match and all the test matches. So great to see you, and you know, make the most of it. I know it's not the ideal Ashes tour for people on and off the pitch, but I'm sure you'll find many ways to pass your time.
Yeah, don't worry. You can put the violins away.
All right, Ali Martin from The Guardian. Many thanks for joining us.
Cheers, guys.